Welcome back to Secret Weapons. My name is Mark Johnston, and if this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for leveling up your writing, playing, and production from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a studio. If that's the kind of thing that would appeal to you, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button and stick around for future videos. Today we are taking a look at the brand new Walrus Canvas Clock. The clock is the latest release from Walrus's Canvas utility line. It's been really interesting to see what Walrus has been developing, as utility lines are usually pretty synonymous with lower effort, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean that in the sense of simpler devices, simpler execution on ideas, typically pretty lightweight quality of life improvements to your signal chain, your recording, your live playing, or whatever else. But Walrus came out the gate with the Canvas line with the Canvas DI, a direct injection or line isolator box with switchable DI-LI functionality, a pad, a mono to stereo sum button, and a ground lift. By all accounts, it does more than your average DI box tends to. We've also seen things like the Canvas Tuner, one of the most over-designed tuners to ever hit the market. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, Walrus released the Canvas Rehearsal, a headphone amp that also has built-in metronome, aux input, and even a Bluetooth connection for being able to jam along wirelessly from your phone. And today we're taking a look at another try-hard thing from Walrus Audio. This is the Canvas Clock. And this is exactly what it sounds like, but a whole lot more. The Canvas Clock is a syncing device for your pedal board, and kind of even more than that. At its core, you have a couple key ways of using this thing. You can set tempo in the device by tapping in with the right foot switch, configurable, or scrolling through songs in a set list with the left foot switch, also configurable. But it goes a lot further than that. You have a ton of ports on this thing, including MIDI 5-pin or 1/8 inch in, MIDI 5-pin or 1/8 inch out. On the sides, you have these 4 1/4-inch jacks that can send tempo out to non-MIDI devices. It can send control voltage out to CV-enabled devices, or they can be used as expression or sync inputs as well. On the top, you also have another dedicated sync input, as well as a metronome output, allowing you to use this to send audible click to bandmates, front of house, rehearsal, whatever it is that you might need. So this thing will not only keep all your gear on tempo, it'll also send clicks so everyone else can be on tempo with it as well in case you need that. You have 128 slots for songs in this thing. You can build set lists so that instead of scrolling through just all of those songs, you can create a bunch of pre-made tempos and other things. Once again, we'll get back to that, into sets of set lists to quickly be able to pull up a kind of pre-made run of show for syncing all your devices. And what's crazy is you can do more than just sync. For each of these songs that you can save in here, you can not only save tempos, but you can also set this thing up to send MIDI PC and CC messages out with each new song, allowing you to do things like pull up specific presets on your ACS1 or your Big Sky or your Microcosm or whatever each time you switch to a new song, as well as make specific changes to specific parameters on MIDI-enabled devices with CC messages. And each song can send 15 unique messages over either PC or CC control changes. And of course, you can rename every single one of those songs, you can rename set lists, and every bit of what we've talked about so far with this device can all be live edited over USB-C with a desktop editor. Everything can be done on the device as well, but if you want that kind of expanded workflow and that quicker way of editing, this thing has a very robust desktop editor. So I was already curious about this thing when it came out, but now, having spent a little bit of time digging around in it and everything, I'm really impressed with what the Canvas Clock is able to do. I need something that keeps all of my gear synced up to my DAW. And one other thing that I think is really important to point out about a device like this, especially for somebody like me, is you can configure this thing to either ignore incoming MIDI clock, to take incoming MIDI clock and use it to set its own internal clock that it then sends downstream to its connected devices, Or you can take incoming clock and just pass it straight through unobstructed. Now, if you don't understand why that's a really, really helpful set of configurables, it's because sometimes you want the consistency of clock from a dedicated device like this, or maybe you're just getting a few quick bursts of clock from an external source, and then this thing will keep that going and keep all your devices synced up internally. But for somebody like me who spends most of my time here in my studio syncing up my wet effects to my DAW, I don't just want them on tempo, but I want them on the grid for my DAW itself. Things like the microcosm are at their best when each of those resampled audio samples lands on the grid of my DAW and not just in time with my DAW. So being able to send MIDI clock through this device is incredibly useful. And the fact that I can use this to make kind of broad strokes PC and CC changes on a song-by-song basis means that there's a non-zero chance that this becomes my full MIDI controller for certain gigs. If I do that, I'll try to make a video about it and kind of report back on my success, but I love something that is low weight to set up, that will do the most important things first and all of the auxiliary stuff second. And this feels like it does that for me. It keeps my stuff in time, and when needed, it will change a couple of parameters. So instead of doing like sound samples, let's just talk through the process of wiring up a pedal board with Canvas Clock and some of the kind of submenu things that you can look for when dialing this in for your pedal board as well. So let's build a board. So in the interest of showcasing the versatility of the Canvas Clock, we've gone ahead and set up a pedal board that has a variety of different time-based devices that all can accept different formats for clock. So starting up here in the top right, we have the Jam Pedals Delay Llama Extreme, which is an analog mono delay that has a tap input on the side that is taking non-MIDI tempo cues from like an external analog tap tempo, and that can be connected through one of these ports on the right side. From there, we're going to go ahead and use the 1/8 inch MIDI jack on the top to clock our drum machine as well. So this will basically allow us to send analog tap from the clock to the Delay Llama Extreme and MIDI clock from the same source to our drum machine without the need for a MIDI 5-pin DIN adapter from 5-pin to 1/8 inch, because you can just use that 1/8 inch up top. We could also go ahead and daisy chain from the 1/8 inch jack on the through of the drum machine, the poly step, down to the MIDI input on the Walrus Qi. But instead, what we're going to do for the purposes of this video is utilize the other MIDI output on the device, the 5-pin on the side, with an adapter to clock the Qi and the drum machine to one of the ports on the right side, and then finally, we're going to use one of the ports on the left side of the device, configured for control voltage, to clock the Paragraphs II from Vongon. So if you want to check the configuration of any of these ports, all you have to do is enter your menu system, go down to your globals, jacks, jack number 1, so top right here. You can see that we are set to tempo out. If you want to make any changes to the tempo out settings, you can go here, and this thing gives you a lot of extra control, things like the length of each of the kind of taps being sent, because a lot of devices look for a certain tap that indicates setting tempo versus a hold to oscillate or something like that. So you can set things like the length of each tap, the normally open or normally closed polarity of the external tap kind of device, and then the number of pulses that this is going to send to that device. Sometimes analog devices want a certain number, whether it's 2 taps or 3 taps, to set tempo for a new time signature. And sometimes you want things that will kind of continuously control forever. So go down to number of pulses, and you can send 2 all the way up through infinite pulses, which will just kind of constantly be sending clock, but can also do things like add a little bit of like uncertainty and warble, which you may not want. Let's go ahead and set this one to 3 for good measure, and then let's wire it up. And now that we have that wired up, all you have to do to change the tempo on this device is tap in a tempo on this side. Next up, let's wire up the polyend step drum machine for use with the clock as well. As you can see, I've already set up the step to be looking for external MIDI clock, which it's not currently receiving. So all we have to do is plug into the MIDI output on the top of the canvas clock and the MIDI input on the top of the step. And so now you'll be able to hear that the polyend step and our delay Llama Extreme are locked together with the clock. Next up, I want to go ahead and wire up the Walrus Qi. So we could normally take the MIDI output from the drum machine and run it down to the Qi as well. Instead, what I want to do is just run a second MIDI output from the canvas clock over 5-pin with a 1/8" adapter for the Qi. Now that we have the Qi wired up, let's go ahead and activate both the delay Llama Extreme on a dotted 1/8 note setting and the Qi on a quarter note to give us kind of a very classic delay combination. And finally, let's get this configured for control voltage. So we want to go ahead and take the port on the bottom left side here, port number 4, and set it up to send control voltage to the paragraphs. So what we're going to do is go into our menu, go to our globals, our jacks, down to jack 4. We're going to set the type to control voltage out, and then I want to go down and confirm that my settings are correct. We have start and end times of 100 and 200. I'm not going to pretend like I know what that means because I do not mess with control voltage almost ever. But by consulting the manual on paragraphs, I do know that the start and end points for control voltage on the paragraphs are 0 and 3.3, so I have those configured accordingly. From there, all we have to do is wire it up. So let's take a look at those MIDI macros. We have canvas clock set up with the new Walrus Audio D1 V2. Should have been called D2, whatever, that's a different video. As you can see, we have 80 BPM on the D1 as reflected in the canvas clock's song 1 position. If we step to song number 2, 75, you will see that change to match as well. But there's something else we can do here. Let's jump back to song number 1. Let's go into our menu system, go to macros and set up macro number 1. We can go to messages, type, send a program change value of, let's send 1. And then let's assign that macro to song number 1. We go up to songs, song 1, MIDI macros, assign it to number 1, and we'll back out, go down to macros, and let's set up macro number 2. And let's say PC message value of 5. Same thing over MIDI channel 1 because we have the D1 set up to MIDI channel number 1. We back out. We can go to song number 2 now and assign it MIDI macro number 2. And let's also set the BPM to 90 just for fun. Nothing has to be saved because everything saves as you go. And now we are on song 1, and we can step over to song number 2. Are on our modulated delay. And so now you can see we are song number 1, 80 BPM as shown here, modulated delay. Step to song number 2, BPM changes to 90, and the preset has changed to the digital delay to follow. So you can do up to, I believe, 15 macros per song. So go into your macro, messages, you can send 15 different combinations of PC and CC messages. And you have as many macros as you could possibly need. Basically the ability to set a custom macro for every single song.